And welcome to this edition of Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host, Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray. How are you?
I'm good, Keith. How are you today?
I'm good. We've got a special guest that you have arranged for us for this time. Why don't you introduce him?
All right, I'll be glad to. Todd and I go back a ways. I don't remember, Todd, exactly how we met, but we've been on the internet together for at least a few years, and he's been working all that time on the history of the German atomic bomb. Now, if you know our history about the Manhattan Project, you realize that one of the primary reasons we even had the Manhattan Project is because we were convinced, we along with others, Great Britain as well, convinced that Germany was going to build an atomic bomb. And Leo Szilard went to Albert Einstein because of his name recognition and wrote a letter that was sent to President Roosevelt, actually went to him through Alexander Sachs. And this is in 1939. And the idea was, in that letter, it stated that they was afraid Germany was trying to build a bomb out of uranium. So that led to the Manhattan Project. Now, what's interesting about what Todd's done is he's gone way beyond just what were the early indicators. He does that. He does talk about what they were doing during the World War II, but he also points out that these German scientists formed the basis of a lot, I mean a whole lot, of what we take for granted today as technological achievements. So I think you're going to enjoy his presentation about Germany and their scientists, and start off, Todd, by talking about the German atomic bomb. And anything else you'd like to say about yourself, please go ahead and do that. My introduction is surely not complete with your background. So if you want to add something, please do.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you both for inviting me on the show. I really appreciate it. I'm a scientist, and over the last 77 years, many books and articles have been written about the World War II German nuclear program. But almost all of those have been from historians and journalists, and really not from scientists. I really wanted to analyze it from a scientific perspective, and especially analyze a lot of documents that have been found in archives over the last couple of decades, much more recently than most of those history books. So what I'm going to show you would not have been possible without the help of a whole lot of archives all around the world, and a whole lot of people, including Ray here. And also what I'm going to show is only a subset of material that is available for free from my website. So there are more slides and all these archival documents, a whole lot more information that you can download from my website if you're curious. So the conventional historical view of the wartime German nuclear program was that it was very small and that it really didn't get very far. And that was based on a very limited amount of data. In particular, the US had an ALSOS mission that went into Europe, went into Germany at the end of the war. And they found Werner Heisenberg's fission pile, an incomplete reactor at Haigerloch, and they really didn't find too much else. On the other hand, looking now at the ALSOS documents and archives, you can see that there were all kinds of organizations that we know now were involved in the German nuclear program, and all kinds of scientists and all kinds of locations that ALSOS never even investigated. So they barely even looked at the German nuclear program, and therefore it's not surprising that they found very little information about the German nuclear program. The conventional historical view is also based strongly on the Farm Hall transcripts. So as you guys know, after the war, 10 German nuclear scientists were imprisoned for 6 months in Great Britain at Farm Hall, and their conversations were secretly recorded, and those transcripts have now been published. People place a lot of weight in the fact that those scientists didn't really blab and reveal a whole lot. On the other hand, that was only 10 scientists, and most of the major German nuclear scientists were not present at Farm Hall. Also, the transcripts that we have are only a very small amount of what these guys would have said over the course of 6 months. And at one point in the transcripts, they actually reveal that they seem to know that they're being recorded. And so presumably they would have conducted their conversations accordingly. So the conventional view of the German program is based on this very small amount of data. And so I wanted to take a fresh look at the program. And when you do, you find that the German program was much larger and began much earlier than people have believed. In fact, as early as the 1920s, German scientists began working on nuclear fusion. And then in 1934, a German scientist, Hidetaka Nodak, published theoretical predictions that uranium fission was possible and that plutonium production was possible. 1934. In that same year, possibly inspired by that, Erich Schumann, who was an implosion expert, hired Kurt Diebner, who was a nuclear expert, to work on a secret German army weapons project. And so the fact that here you have implosion and nuclear stuff together for a secret army weapons project seems to indicate the lines along which they were thinking. This work continued through the 1930s. And then by 1938, Hartmut Kalman and Ernst Kuhn had patented high voltage fusion neutron generators and tritium breeders. Germany began mining for uranium in Bulgaria and also in Czech uranium mines that they took over in 1938. And then by the end of 1938, Hahn and Strassmann had officially demonstrated that nuclear fission was possible. Then 1939, after that, was a very big year. Paul Hartek and Wilhelm Groth in Hamburg proposed to the German government that it was possible to construct a fission bomb. And then for the next several years over the course of the war, they worked on many different aspects of that. Another German scientist, Siegfried Pflüger, in 1939 also published papers with detailed calculations of both fission reactors and fission bombs. And he appears to have become the head theoretical physicist of the German nuclear program after that. That same year, Georg Stetter in Austria filed a detailed patent on fission reactors and on fusion, and proceeded to lead a very large Austrian research group throughout the war. Wilhelm Ohnesorge and Manfred von Ardenne at the Reichspost, the German post office, kind of their equivalent of AT&T Bell Labs, launched a program to enrich uranium and to build a fission bomb. Still in 1939, Germany began ordering and making heavy water for fission reactors. And in 1940, or possibly even sooner, Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, Fritz Hautermans, and others proposed and calculated the suitability of plutonium-239 for bombs. So the German nuclear program was quite large, much larger than historians have believed. People generally talk about Werner Heisenberg and the group of people around him. Those were just one small part of a much, much larger program, many different groups across many different organizations, government agencies, companies, and these were not independent groups. So each one was working on different things, but they were all coordinated, apparently at the top, first by the German army up until 1942. And then from 1942 onward, apparently they were coordinated by the SS. And these research groups, these nuclear production sites were spread all over German territory. So here's a map of known and suspected nuclear research and production sites that I've compiled based on archival documents. They were all over the place. So it was not just Heisenberg and his buddies in a basement in Berlin. It was a massive, massive program, truly comparable to the Manhattan Project in the United States. Germany also obtained a lot of uranium and a lot of thorium, which could be used to make uranium-233, which is fissionable. And so either they had a large nuclear weapons program, or else they were simply trying to power their DeLorean, but they were up to something. So between 1938 and 1945, Germany obtained over 1,500 tons of uranium ore and over 1,300 tons of thorium ore from at least 10 different sites all over Europe, everywhere from Portugal to Bulgaria and in between. They had uranium mines all over the place. Here are a couple of quotes from US intelligence documents after the war saying that the Germans put uranium mining on a high priority throughout the entire 6 years of the war. And in fact, it was such a high priority that they didn't ship the uranium ore from the mines to their destination by truck or by train. They flew it. They wanted the uranium ore to get to the destination as rapidly as possible. So there were special planes and the uranium ore was flown to multiple destinations in Germany and Austria where they were processing the uranium. The intelligence source also says that the Germans continued mining uranium up to the very last moment of the war. So it truly was a high priority. Here's another quote from 1943, an intelligence source says that in Bulgaria, where the Germans had been mining uranium since 1938, that was done under the organization Todt, which was the German equivalent of the US Army Corps of Engineers. And an engineer there accidentally slipped up and revealed that they planned to use that to create an incendiary weapon that would destroy London. Then the uranium was taken to many different sites, again, all over German territory. This shows some of the main sites that are known from archival documents, but all over the place. And at these sites, it was processed into refined uranium oxide, into uranium hexafluoride, and into uranium metal, and then used for further processes. It was used, among other things, for enrichment. So to enrich uranium, Manfred von Ardenne and other scientists developed electromagnetic separators that were quite comparable to the Oak Ridge Y12 calutrons. And they demonstrated fully functional prototypes of these. Separately, Gustav Hertz had invented gaseous diffusion enrichment, actually as early as 1923. So from 1925, here is a diagram from Hertz of a cascade of gaseous diffusion enrichment. And even though Hertz was Jewish, he was allowed to remain and work in Germany throughout the war. So he was doing something very high priority that the German government appreciated. And then after the war, he went over to the Soviet Union and helped in the Soviet nuclear weapons program. And so this gaseous diffusion would have been quite comparable to, say, K-25 at Oak Ridge. Then there were centrifuges. The US did not get very far with uranium gaseous centrifuges during the war, but the Germans did. So there were multiple groups in Germany that developed and perfected uranium gas centrifuges. Many of their reports survive and are currently in the archives of the Deutsches Museum in Munich. And they developed not only prototypes of these centrifuges, but they mass produced them. Here is an archival document from the files of Vannevar Bush. And this document indicates that as of early 1944, US intelligence knew that there was a whole factory in Switzerland, of all places, that was mass producing German gas uranium centrifuges based on German specifications, and then shipping them to unknown destinations in Germany. So gas centrifuges were being mass produced in Switzerland. Also, we know from other archival documents in Breslau, in Göttingen, in Freiburg, in Kiel, and possibly other locations as well. Then these methods of enriching uranium were installed at locations. We have archival documents indicating some of those. One of those locations appears to have been south of Hamburg, an area called Lüneburger Heide. So here is an OSS document from 1943 that talks about vast underground factories putting out a new explosive for bombs. And they say that the bombs have a strange design. The bombs are designed to be spherical. Now, bombs are usually designed to be aerodynamic, which is not spherical. If the bomb must be spherical, then there's some physics that compels that, which suggests a Fat Man type implosion bomb. Here's a different OSS report from 1943 about the same location. It says that these underground bomb-proof factories are employing large numbers of people and making a high density material that is supposed to have an enormous explosive effect. With 1 kilogram of the material, everything should be razed away or disintegrated to dust and ashes within a radius of approximately 4 kilometers. Here's a different document from 1944 talking about 2 other factories. These are in Eastern Czech territory controlled by the Germans. And it says that there were 2 factories, they were identical. Each one employed 30,000 employees, so very large factories. And they were producing a new explosive for what OSS called a Zusa. A Zusa was the OSS code word for the German nuclear program. So they were producing an explosive for the German nuclear program at two factories that collectively employed 60,000 people. These factories would have been removed by Soviet forces at the end of the war, so we don't have further Allied reports on these. So in addition to enriching uranium, apparently Germany was also working on breeding plutonium. Everybody always hears about Heisenberg's reactor, which started at Berlin-Dahlem and then was moved to Haigerloch toward the end of the war. But you don't really hear about all these other German nuclear reactors. And some of these were small experimental piles, not unlike Chicago Pile 1 that Fermi assembled in the United States. But some of these sound very much like they were large production reactors, comparable to, say, Hanford. So one at Gusen that sounds like that, one at Königsberg that sounds like that. Some of these others may have been as well. And as an example, this is the nuclear physicist Kurt Diebner and his colleagues outside their experimental fission pile early. This is 1941. And you can see that clearly they are not playing around. They're quite serious about what they're doing at their fission pile. So by the end of the war, there's evidence that there were actually large production reactors, again, comparable to Hanford. Here is a site at Gusen, Austria. These are aerial photos taken by the United States in late in the war, 1945. And this appears to be a reactor complex that is mostly underground. Here you can see it exposed. And then a month later, shortly before US forces arrived, German forces completely buried and sealed up this entire complex. And it has remained sealed to this day. And officially, this complex does not exist. This is not on any maps. But unofficially here, you can see the photos of it. Here is the son of the commandant of the Gusen camp. He was interviewed on camera, and he said that he knew, based on his father's experience as commandant of the camp, that nuclear research was being carried out at Gusen, and that according to the SS people there, it would enable the production of the atomic bomb. Here is a document I found in US Air Force archives. This is a cover letter describing this and other Austrian facilities, and somebody very prominently labeled it underground pile. Now, unfortunately, I only have the cover letter for this. The report that goes with this cover letter is mysteriously unavailable. Then there's production of heavy water. So everybody always hears about heavy water production at the plant in Femork, Norway, and how that was very heroically destroyed by Kirk Douglas and Richard Harris and saved the war. But you don't hear about the other 19 or so heavy water plants all over Europe. So there were at least 20 plants all over Europe apparently producing heavy water for the German nuclear program, despite the fact that wartime production was urgently needed in other areas. So why this high priority? It strongly suggests that heavy water was needed for breeder reactors, that there were indeed functional breeder reactors someplace, or possibly that it was needed for electronuclear breeding, a different way of making plutonium, or for fusion fuel or other purposes. Moreover, why is it that almost all the reports about all these heavy water plants are still classified and unavailable? So here from US archives, withdrawal notice, access restricted, withdrawal notice, access restricted, withdrawal notice, access restricted, access restricted, access restricted. If there was no German nuclear program, why do these reports exist? And why are they still classified after 77 years? In addition to fission fuel and heavy water, Germany was also producing large quantities of other nuclear materials, including lithium, beryllium, boron, graphite, fluorine, aluminum, calcium, nickel, zirconium, and cadmium. They were producing these in quantities up to thousands of tons during the war. And in fact, there were some sites that were producing many of these materials all at the same site. For example, IG Farben's Bitterfeld facility was producing heavy water and graphite and aluminum and calcium and possibly other things as well. And by golly, sure, that's not mysterious at all. In addition to that, in addition to being used in Germany, many of these materials were exported to Japan. We have lists of materials on U-boats that were sent to Japan, and many of these nuclear-related materials were sent to Japan. So not only did Germany produce these materials, they knew what to do with them. These are diagrams from Erich Schumann, who had been working, as I said, since 1934 on nuclear weapons. So these diagrams from Schumann show a spherical implosion bomb with a weight of 2 tons. It used fission fuel, probably uranium-235, possibly plutonium. And Schumann showed that in the center, there would also be fusion fuel that would give a boost to the explosive yield. Schumann showed in his diagrams in detail how the fusion and fission fuel would be surrounded by conventional explosives. Those would be both TNT and RDX explosives shaped into explosive lenses. So extremely, very much like the Fat Man design in the United States. Schumann also showed how the implosion process would work, that the implosion would be activated by detonators at many points surrounding the explosives, and then it would implode the pit in the center of the bomb. So they knew how to design a bomb. Did they build it? Here is a document that Rainer Karlsch, a German historian, found in an archive in Moscow in 2003. This document is quite shocking, but it appears to be genuine. It's part of a long paper trail of earlier and later documents, including documents that have been published elsewhere. This is a letter from March 1945 from Soviet General Ilyichev to Stalin. And this letter says in great detail, the Germans have in recent times, meaning March 45, carried out 2 large capacity bomb explosions in Thuringia. The bomb filled with uranium-235 and weighing approximately 2 tons was brought to the test site. Buildings and fortifications specially constructed for the test were destroyed in the explosion. Prisoners of war who were near the epicenter of the explosion died, often without leaving a trace. And a massive radioactive effect was observed. And this Soviet intelligence report from March 45, from during the war, gives a detailed design of the bomb that agrees extremely well with Erich Schumann's design. So it says the bomb was 2 tons. It was a spherical implosion bomb. It used uranium-235. It had fusion fuel at the center. It gives the details of the bomb design really quite at length. And it says that the bomb was specifically designed to be mounted on a rocket of the V-type, so a V2 or more advanced type of rocket. And describes the implosion, that a shock from the explosion of the TNT was directed toward the center, allowing the uranium to reach a critical mass. So it describes all this in detail, how the bomb worked, that the bomb was built, the bomb was tested. We have a number of other sources from archives that also describe the same bomb design, and all these independent sources describe exactly the same implosion design. We also have a number of other sources that all describe exactly that same test in March 1945 in Thuringia. So there's considerable evidence that this occurred. Now that raises the question, could you detect the results at the test site now? A lot of people say, well, yes, of course you grab a Geiger counter, you go wandering around, you find where they tested this thing. Those are people who learned their nuclear physics from watching Planet of the Apes. Now, if you learn your nuclear physics from the actual source books, you can do the calculations. So Glasstone and Dolan is the standard reference book on this stuff. And according to that, 77 years later, where we are now, the radioactivity at the test site would be almost 1 billion times lower than it was an hour after the test. And if you do the math, that corresponds to the current expected radioactivity at the test site being 10 to 30 times smaller than the normal natural background level of radiation. So you could not detect this by wandering around with a Geiger counter. Now, if somebody has a whole lot of money and is willing to do a whole lot of testing and digging, it may be possible to detect things at the test site. In particular, if there was a very large natural uranium tamper in this bomb, there may be enough residue from that that could be detected, but this would be a large program. So the Germans appear to have had a nuclear weapon. The Germans certainly thought that they had a nuclear weapons program. Here is an archival photograph of Mr. Mustache himself, apparently surrounded by lots of nuclear physicists. This looks like Kurt Diebner. This looks like Werner Heisenberg. This looks like Fritz Strassmann. This looks like Rolf Wiederow. And this photograph was taken in April 1943, so over 2 years before the end of the war. And this photograph was taken in Austria, very close to Gusen, very close to that possible fission reactor that I showed you guys earlier. So if Germany had a nuclear weapon, why did they not use it in the war? Here is a formerly secret cable from Allen Dulles, who later became head of the CIA. So in April 45, he sent this cable to Washington saying that the Fuhrer is surrounded by a small group of advisors who believe in a last specific secret weapon, which they call the desperation weapon. But the generals believe that this weapon could not decide the war. It would only cause a terrible bloodbath. And so the generals are refusing to use the weapon, even if Hitler ordered them to. So it appears that Germany did indeed have nuclear weapons, but the German generals were smart enough to realize that even if they could vaporize 1 or 2 Allied targets, that would not be enough to win the war. It would simply make the Allies even madder, and Germany would still lose and face even greater repercussions. There's a lot of evidence also from the Allied side. So from December 1944, here is the diary of FDR's secretary. She says that FDR had just been informed by a reliable source that the Germans have a bomb that will kill everything within a mile, and that the German program to develop that bomb is, quote, way ahead of us. So ahead of the Manhattan Project as known by FDR and his advisors. Here's a document that I found at the National Archives. This was also from December 1944. It says intelligence indicates that the enemy is working in the project field, meaning nuclear weapons, and they have evidence that the enemy has succeeded in producing this and has a project on utilization of how to actually use the bomb against enemy targets. It presents the evidence for this, the intelligence evidence that had been collected in an appendix called Tab A. So this document is present in National Archives, but when I went to find Tab A, there's only a yellow card that says, in the review of this file, this item was removed because access to it is restricted after 77 years. So if there was no German nuclear program, why is all this information in the archives still being withheld? Here was a Newsweek report from 1945, just after the end of the war, and it said, since the surrender of the Nazi armies, Allied officers, blabbing to Newsweek reporters, have revealed that Germany would have been able to strike with atomic bombs by January 1945. The highest Allied officials, so it was high Allied officials talking to Newsweek reporters, knew that such explosives could have won the war for the Axis. And then here's a report from General Marshall, September 45, again after the war, saying German technological advances, such as the development of atomic explosives, made it imperative that we attack before these terrible weapons could be turned against us. So Marshall was admitting that these existed as well. We know that Western Allied forces visited most of the major nuclear sites I showed you. The eastern sites were all seized by Soviet forces, and goodness knows what happened to those sites. But Western sites were visited by very high profile people. We have the photos of people visiting places like Lüneburger Heide, I mentioned earlier, Ohrdruf, where one of the tests is believed to have occurred, Pilsen, Gusen that I mentioned. We have photographs of smiling people visiting these places, but we don't have the reports. And naturally, they would have written reports about what they found at these places, what they brought back from these places. But these reports are nowhere to be found in archives. So where are these reports? Why are these reports still being withheld 77 years later? We also have information from people who had worked on these programs and then were interrogated or actually came to the US or UK after the war. As I said, the top theoretical physicist in the German nuclear weapons program appears to have been Siegfried Flügge. And here is a letter from Edward Teller in the United States in 1947, urgently requesting that Siegfried Flügge be brought to the United States to help Edward Teller with a program of great national importance, probably the hydrogen bomb. And indeed, Flügge was put on a plane and brought to the US, along with a lot of other German and Austrian scientists who appear to have worked on fission and fusion weapons in Germany during the war. The top SS general in charge of the German nuclear weapons program by the end was Hans Kammler. And according to official history books, he died in early May 1945 at the end of the war. But here is a document I found in US archives from November 45, 6 months later, saying that Kammler is in custody and is being interrogated and is singing like a canary. So sprightly for a dead guy. So we know that these dozens of people from the German nuclear program were interrogated and in fact even worked in the United States and UK after the war. So the question is, where are the interrogation transcripts from all of that? Where are the reports from all of that? We know that those must exist, and yet those are not to be found in archives. Other information from archives, this is from September 45 after the war, and it's talking about a Zuse, which again was the OSS code word for the German nuclear weapons program. It says that post-war, they'd realized that a Zuse was so serious that the US had appointed a special general, who they were not naming here, his name was so secret, but they'd appointed a special general. Everything was supposed to go through the special general. They were urgently trying to locate all German scientists associated with a Zuse, and they required a maximum security with fewest number of persons involved. They didn't want information about a Zuse to get out to the US public. Copies of all reports had to be sent directly to Washington, nobody else. This subject's so tight at this time, we are playing very close with special general. So who was the special general and where are these reports? Here are index cards from the National Archives showing that somewhere in US archives, there are reports that were classified as Germany, nuclear physics, blueprints of atomic bomb, Germany, nuclear physics, atomic bomb detonating plans. Where are these reports? Here was something published after the war by Colonel George Bryant Woods. During the war, he was in intelligence for the Air Technical Services Command. And after the war, he became assistant to the Undersecretary of the Air Force. So in 1946, he wrote that Germany's plans for the A9, an advanced V2 type rocket with the atomic bomb, it is well known, at least to intelligence officials like Woods, that the Germans originally had hoped to have their atomic bomb developments completed by the end of 1944. So to sum up, the evidence that is currently available, I believe proves that the wartime German nuclear program was much larger than most historians have believed, that it was much more advanced than historians have believed, and that scientists, materials, and information from that program aided nuclear programs in the US, Soviet Union, and other countries after the war. In my opinion, the existing evidence also strongly suggests, but does not yet conclusively prove, that Germany successfully tested one or more fission bombs at the end of the war. So I think much more research needs to be done in this area. History is not settled at all. I would strongly recommend anybody who's interested to go digging in the archives all around the world, as well as personal collections of families of former soldiers and former scientists, and to lobby to have all relevant files declassified and released. Since we also know a number of sites that appear to have been locations for production or testing of these weapons, it'd be very important to conduct industrial archaeology digs at those sites and laboratory analysis of samples from those sites and try to confirm some of this. So if people are interested, there's a whole lot more information you can download for free from my website. This book, Forgotten Creators, has over 1,000 pages of these archival documents I found from all around the world on the German nuclear program. And as Ray mentioned early on, also a lot of information on other aspects of the history of science in Germany. So you guys have any questions?
Wow, that's amazing. That's information that I have. Most of it I've never heard before.
Thank you.
That was something.
Thank you.
Keith, I'm not surprised. I have been following what Todd has been doing for as best I can and this didn't just start recently. He's been working on this a long time.
Yeah, obviously.
And this document, how many pages is it, Todd?
Well, this book is Forgotten Creators. It's currently over 4,800 pages. It's available for free from my website. And it covers the German nuclear program, but also many other aspects of the history of science and technology in Germany. But related to the German nuclear program in particular, there's over 1,000 pages in the book that has all these archival documents, text and photographs that I found in various archives around the world. And so it describes the nuclear program and also describes the methods of delivery, the rockets and things that Germany was developing to deliver these weapons.
Well, Keith, I think you'll agree with me that we have so much potential here that we should go ahead and get Todd to agree that we will bring him back, and possibly even back on May the 21st. Now, Todd, I believe you have some classes in the morning, so we'll work with you on your schedule, but we do want you to come back.
Yeah,
wouldn't you, Keith?
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Okay. And Todd, we'll work with you on the time to do the recording, but it'll be, again, Keith's got a program next time, and then we'll schedule you for the one following up in the 21st of May, or any other time that you want to do it. But you do have so much. I have one question for you. You mentioned briefly that there was German submarines, I believe you said that, and they were called U-boats, I think, that were taking materials to Japan.
Yes.
There is a book by Carter Heydrich, The Critical Mass, that talks about the submarine U-234 and the fact that it was headed to Japan. But the captain, at the end of the war, the captain decided to surrender to the Allies. Do you have information on that particular boat?
Yes, Heydrich was one of the very early people to start investigating the German nuclear program. So he was really a trailblazer there. Right. And he discovered that there was a lot of mysterious stuff about this German U-boat U-234 that, as you say, was transporting nuclear materials from Germany to Japan at the end of the war, never made it to Japan, ended up in the United States. Right. So Heydrich found that the trail basically goes cold. The U-boat was brought into port in the United States. Large quantities of uranium and other materials were unloaded from the U-boat, and then they simply vanish in the historical records. And I followed his trail in the National Archives, and indeed the trail does go cold. So definitely all this stuff came into the US. There was really great nuclear material, other information, experts on this U-boat, and then just they vanish into thin air. Neither Heydrich nor I can find out what happened to them. So it is a great mystery. But
Yes, I agree.
what hydrogen did not point out is that that was only one of several U-boats. I found a document indicating that at least 10 U-boats, including that one, were dispatched from Germany to Japan at the end of the war, carrying top secret critical materials. And that's at the end of the war. There were other U-boats and transports that went before that. So there was a whole lot of stuff that was either sent to Japan or they tried to send to Japan. And that included many of these nuclear materials. It included uranium oxide, possibly enriched. It included lithium, zirconium, all kinds of nuclear related materials.
A comment about that. Carter and I have talked, and he's actually been to Oak Ridge. I took him on a tour through Y12 for him to actually see those calutrons. And he and I agreed that he did find some evidence that possibly Robert Oppenheimer was up in Virginia at the same time that that U-boat was brought in. And if in fact that happened, as we assume something happened with that uranium, my contention is that it came to Oak Ridge, went through our calutrons, and went back to Japan in a little different form than Germany intended.
Yes, Oak Ridge certainly would have been the logical destination for that uranium. The question is how enriched, or was the uranium enriched before it came to Oak Ridge? And neither Heydrich nor I can really answer that question. So hopefully somebody can find the answer to that in the future.
Yeah, that would be good to know. And I'm like you, I'm at a loss as to where we might best go to find that kind of detail. One other thought, this is not within the scope of what you've talked to us about, but I'll just ask you just to know, the Japanese may well have been working on a nuclear program as well. Have you done any research in that, or have you concentrated all your energies on Germany?
I have focused on Germany. I've talked to other people who have studied the Japanese program. There's a researcher named Dwight Ryder, no relation at all, but interesting coincidence. And then Robert Wilcox has written a book, and several folks have investigated that, William Pellis and others. And there is considerable evidence that also the German program was, or the Japanese program was much larger and much more advanced than historians have believed. Now, currently, the state of knowledge about that program, documents from the archives, are not as good as what we've been able to find on the German program. So we don't really know just how far the Japanese got. But I do think it's safe to say that the Japanese had a much larger and more advanced program than people have allowed in history books.
I would agree. What I found indicates that there may even have been an explosion. And but again, there's sparse documentation of that, and some of it is oral history, and some of it is just speculation on the parts of people who think about what logically could have happened had they had the progress that they knew about. Of course, we do have records of what they found in Tokyo after the war and those sorts of things. But as with the German program, it's very sketchy and hard to pin down the details. But I think what you've done on the German program is just outstanding. This information, Keith's not the only person who will say after viewing this program today, wow, I never heard of that before. So I'm so glad that you agreed to come on and share that with us.
Oh, thank you.
Keith, you have any other thoughts?
No, I appreciate it and look forward to another presentation from you in the not too distant future, Todd. We really appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, Keith, tell us a little about what you're going to do next time.
Yeah, next time you're not going to be with us, Ray. You're going to be on an adventure. So you asked me if I might do a program, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Secret City Film Festival, which it is currently known as the Knoxville Film Festival. This is something that I started 19 years ago in Oak Ridge. And I'll talk a little bit about how about its history, about why I started a film festival in Oak Ridge, why it was called the Secret City Film Festival, and kind of some of the things that we've done and the progress that we've made over the last 19 years or so. I am right now in the middle of preparing for our festival, which will be held in September. And just a little bit about some of the things that go into putting a film festival together, and maybe a few stories of some folks that have come to the festival throughout the years and maybe gone on and do some important things. As a matter of fact, I will tell a story about a couple of guys who came to the festival when it was the Secret City Festival in Oak Ridge. And they are now one of the top 10 money makers on the internet. So I'm not going to say who it is. I'll tease that a little bit, but I'll tell their story. And I think I read a couple of weeks ago that their organization brought in $30 million last year from being internet celebrities. So anyway, that's what I plan, and I may have a guest or two that can talk. Some filmmakers that have participated over the years. So that's what we'll plan on doing next time.
Well, it does sound like you're going to bring some hidden history out. And Todd, again, we can't tell you how much we appreciate having you with us today, and look forward to other opportunities for you to share more information with us. And let me remind you viewers to notice where that website is, writerinstitute.org/revolutionary-innovation, and that will get you to this free document, this book that you can download. And also, Todd, I believe the slides that you used today are also on your website. Is that correct?
Yes, the slides are also there, and deleted scenes as well.
Okay.
All right. Very good.
Excellent. All right. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, Todd. And thank you, Ray. Mm-hmm. And folks, thanks for watching. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new hidden history.